So today I'm going to show you my go-to recipe for brewing delicious coffee using the Aeropress. This isn't the best recipe, but it is a recipe. It's my go-to recipe. It's what I use as my common denominator when I buy a bag and I want to know where to go next. It's a very good starting point. Obviously there are a lot of recipes that are getting popular these days. If you've checked out the World Aeropress Championships, things like that are interesting, but I like to have this starting point. But I gotta say right off the bat that I'm not a coffee professional. I've never been trained as a barista. I've essentially learned everything I know about immersion brewing techniques like the Aeropress from YouTube. So besides sharing my recipe, I think the most important thing I can do is hopefully refer you to some of the best coffee channels and personalities that I've come across on YouTube, and I might remember to say some of their names, but you'll find all of their links in the description below. And for starters, let's put the recipe up. You can see the main thing about this recipe is it doesn't brew a big coffee, and that's important for me. It's I'll usually like to have no more than less than 200 milliliters of coffee if I could, because I can just have another one at lunch and then another one a little bit later on. That's my preference, and I can make a gradual adjustment, and I will not have forgotten that first cup by the time I move on to the second. So, and that's one of the nice things about the Aeropress is, when you use a V60, it really works best when you fill up that cone, when you've got 30 grams. So you're brewing 500 milliliters. Not with Aeropress. You could do as much or as little as you like, and that's what's nice about it.
Okay, so let's see what we are brewing with today. This is the coffee that I'll be brewing today, one of these two. This is Pilot, which is a local brewery here in Toronto, and local is good because fresh is good. For immersion or pour over type brews, you want the freshest possible coffee you can get your hands on. It's not like espresso where you might be better off waiting 2 or 3 weeks. With this method, you want to go as fresh as possible because there will be a bloom phase and you'll get all that CO2 out of there, which is something you can't really do with espresso. I really like their labeling. They've essentially got the scale here, which shows you this Academy is a bit more classic, meaning it's got that typical flavors, toastier, nuttier, apparently citrus, caramel, and balanced. Whereas this one is a little bit more on the adventurous side. I think I'll go with that. I'm feeling adventurous today. Apricot, cranberry, and juicy. Of course, there's the water. I'm not going to nerd out on water today, or ever probably. Just use the freshest, most well-filtered water you can get yourself. Hard, soft, I don't really know the difference. The kettle. This is my kettle. You do not need something this special. As long as it will boil the water, you're all set. Temperature is something that is important in this brew. We're going to go with 90 as the recipe calls for, and this kettle will get you exactly what temperature you want, and it will hold it there for you. If you don't have this, no problem. Just go 60 seconds off boil, time it, and that way if you want to go cooler, you can just go longer off boil. If you want to go hotter, you could just be right off the boil. You could even use a carafe as an intermediary vessel to help you control your temperature. Other people recommend microwaving water. That way you can use a number of seconds to control the actual temperature. But I've got this. I'll set it to 90. I'll get it going. It has this gooseneck, which is handy to get a nice consistent pour, but that's far more important for a V60 or a Chemex type brew. It's not as big a deal for this Aeropress. Okay, after the kettle, I wanted to cover the papers. Yeah, so I'm using, obviously the papers that come with this thing are just fine. You could use those. When I say with this thing, I mean with the Aeropress. But I tend to use these ones, Acer papers. These are made here in Canada, in Vancouver. What's fancy about that is these are the papers that seem to be the winningest World Aeropress Championship papers. Most of the recently winning recipes use these. They're a little thicker than the papers that Aeropress comes with. They're also, I would say, better filtering, so you're going to see less sediment. But that's not really a problem you get even with the standard filters, and you can always double up on those. But the most important thing I could say about filters that not enough people are saying is you can reuse them. You can reuse them at least 3 times. I've used one 6 times. Not much happens. It gets a little bit tougher to push through the coffee, but very minimal or no impact as far as I'm concerned to the flavor. So, you know, save some money. Use your papers 2 or 3 or more times. Next thing I want to show off is my scale. So you do need a good scale. It's if you want to control your recipe, something like this is critical. This one's nice because it's got decimal 0 showing, so you can get a more exact measurement. It has a timer built in. You can't really damage this thing. You won't be able to. You can kind of spill boiling water right on the display. I've done that, nothing happens. And that's a good thing. And of course, I recommend having some water or sparkling water, because the coffee is not there to hydrate you. The coffee is there for its flavor, and you don't want to be having that to quench your thirst. So have some coffee, have some water before. It'll open up your palate. About the grinder, this is what I use. The key is to use a burr grinder. It doesn't matter whether it's manual or automatic. Manual takes a little bit more energy a little bit more effort than it probably should, but that's what I use. This one is the company is made by Knock. It's made in the UK someplace. It's a former Kickstarter product. What's nice about it is it's easy to adjust. I have it set to 2.5 turns from the closed position for this recipe. So 2.5, that brings you what I would call a medium grind. And alternatively, if you don't want to spend the £99 plus shipping, you could go a little cheaper. Here's another good option. This is available at a lot of retailers. It's $50 or $60. Sometimes it goes on sale for less. It is a burr grinder. Just don't use a blade grinder, and you can't really go wrong. Of course, there's the Aeropress itself. And all I got to say about the Aeropress is this particular recipe is an inversion method brew. So we're going to be using this upside down versus what the inventor initially intended. It's going to be inverted, and that's going to be better because we're going to get a better control over the actual time, over the agitation, over all those things. And of course, for the agitation, you've got your trusty spoon. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is weigh out our coffee. Tear your scale, and we're going with the anthem. Apricot, cranberry, and juicy, whatever that means. So we'll get to 13, 12.8, 13.2, whatever. Try to hit 13 if you can. And in that goes into the grinder. So like I mentioned, we're going for a medium. And this is something that you'll adjust. If you find that you can get a bit more sweetness out of it and you're definitely extracted enough, you can go a little coarser. Alternately, you can keep the grind the same, but go a little cooler in water temperature. Try to not mess around with the 13 grams to 175 milliliters of water. Leave that intact if you can. It's not easy to change more than one variable at a time and extract any meaningful information from that. Okay? And no matter what you do, the grinds will stick to the burrs a little bit, but you will probably get 99% of it out of there. You can tear your scale and check that you still have 13 if you want. You'll have 13. So tear the scale again, and before I go further, I would like to wet my paper. You don't have to do this step. This is an optional step. So the inventor of the Aeropress has famously claimed that this is an unnecessary thing. The paper doesn't have a taste, but nobody seems to agree with him on that front. And if you wet the paper, you also get the side benefit of warming up your cup, which is nice because otherwise it might cool your coffee a little too quickly. And especially if you're using a used paper like I am, it'll help you to get some of that old yellow coffee water out of there. Okay, so that's ready. Now we can tear, we can start the timer and add 35 grams of water to the coffee. 30 seconds of bloom is what we're looking for. I'm at 10 seconds already. I usually give it 4, maybe 5, maybe 6 stirs. Try to keep it consistent because what you do here is going to affect the flavor. So if you're comparing one coffee to the previous time you brewed it, you're going to want to do the same thing every time. We're at 30 seconds. Let's add the rest of our water. Also do this consistently as well. If you're going to do a little swirl, do a little swirl, but do the same swirl every time. And if you want to bring the water in fast, I recommend bringing it in slow. The last thing you want to do is have this topple over. Get it up to that 175 grams that we said we'd go for. I can't help it, but I do 2 to 3 more stirs. And now it's just a waiting game. No hanging around though, because we'll get to that 1.5 minutes mark pretty fast. Press it down to get that air out of there, because once you invert this thing, you don't want any of those grinds sticking to that rubber stopper, to the rubber pusher. We're at a minute 20, I'll invert it at a minute 25, and at a minute 30 we're gonna start putting just very gentle pressure, a little more than the weight of your hand, but the target is, let's get this plunged out at the 2-minute mark. And you know you're doing it right when you only see water coming out in the form of droplets from the underside of the plastic. If you start to see water coming out the sides, if it's hissing, if it's dribbling around the outside, then you're not actually filtering. You want to actually let the filter do its work. So we're at the 2-minute mark. I talked too much and didn't keep my pressure on. But there you have it. At 2 minutes and 10 seconds, we hear it hissing. That's when you want to stop. Turn this over. That'll be an easy cleanup pretty soon, because it's just a matter of pushing out that puck. And we can let this cool and enjoy it in about 2-3 minutes once it's come down in temperature. The best resource, in my opinion, on all of YouTube, hands down, is James Hoffman. James Hoffman is a coffee pro. He, I think, has a few businesses related to coffee, but he's a world barista champion or some competition or other back in the day. But his channel, how he explains coffee science, how he explains how to taste and how to do cupping, how to do French press, everything he's taught all of his viewers. There's nothing like it on YouTube. So I highly recommend you go and check him out. The other one that I would recommend is European Coffee Trip. There's a host named Alice. There's a few others. They're very Aeropress focused. They've got a lot of excellent cold brew recipes as well. Not cold brew, but cold coffees. They've got some good recipes. I might even make a 1 or 2 of them in the future. And there's also, it's Prometheus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but his coffee channel is pretty awesome too. He's very down to earth and helps you taste and understand coffee. And yeah, thanks for watching.